Agora nós vamos passar então a nossa apresentação final.
So now we're going to move to our last keynote talk. I am sure that you're also very encouraged to listen to this presentation. Our guest is the inventor of CSS together with Haekon Lee. He was actively engaged in developing this working tool that all of us use. Bert works at W3C, has been working that since 95, and he has worked to develop standards with us, especially to standardize CSS. He's also actively engaged in developing standards like XML, HTML, and MassML, XML. So our last talk is going to be about connected books. You didn't think books connect to the internet? Well, you see what can happen. Mr. Ross, you have the floor.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so after 2 days of very many different topics, I hope you're still awake. I barely am myself. Connected books and CSS, you heard that already, so let's go to the next slide. Why? Why do I want to talk about that? Well, the main reason, of course, I like the topic, I like to talk about that. But there's another reason. I think this is a time where this particular topic is at a tipping point. That's not my words, those are the words of the Digital Publishing Interest Group of the W3C. They wrote a document in which they explained the current situation. The document's called Portable Web Publications. It's about requirements, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Another reason for this topic, why this is urgent, why this is important at the moment, is the W3C and the IDPF decided to combine their efforts and start working together on this particular topic, on making digital publishing, digital publications, documents, books, other things, journals, better connected, more interesting to read, better, easier to read. That's a process that was started earlier this year. In May, we issued a press release about that. We're currently in the process of organizing that, and if all goes well, then in January next year, the IDPF and W3C will have a single organization. W3C, I'm sure you know that. You've heard the term many times already in those weeks. It's also on the screen there, W3C, so I don't have to explain what that is. You know that I work there. Actually, that's my office there. On the screen, the middle window is mine. So IDPF, what's that? IDPF makes EPUB. That's the electronic books, the e-books, the most common format for e-books. Most e-readers accept that format. Currently, the current version is version 3. It's used for books, as I said, also for online journals. And it's also the basis for talking books. So people with visual deficiencies can hear the book spoken to them. That's the same technology. And it's based on HTML and CSS. So I mentioned the Digital Publishing Interest Group already. That's an interest group in W3C where many publishers are active. Not only they, but many publishers came to W3C specifically for that interest group. And that's where The work is being prepared, so to say. They are writing the requirements documents, what is needed to make better books, including the document that I mentioned. So what are those portable web documents? There's many aspects. I'm only going to mention a few of those. Think of an electronic publication, a journal, a book, an article, a textbook, maybe an exam that you do at school. It's a self-contained document. Everything you can get with a single click. You have the whole thing. We have to make sure that it works, even if there are images in there, even if there are scripts in there, even if there are videos in there, anything, you can still get it as a single unit with a single click. You can also easily copy it on a CD or on a USB stick. Or by email, you can even send a document by email. Other aspect is that it should be usable on the web, of course. We are talking about web documents, and I'm working for the Web Consortium. So we want these documents to be like web pages that you all know well. So as interactive, as easy to get, as readable as a web page, but also you should get the same experience when you're offline. When you're not connected to the network, you should still be able to read that same document and get the same experience. The links in it still work, except when they go to other documents, of course, but the table of contents works, the scripts that are in there works. If there is a quiz in there, questions that you can answer, they should still work. So the same experience online and offline. It's also going to be, we hope, a standard that is available on many different devices, in a browser, of course, an e-reader. There should be apps for it. Maybe your TV will show it too. Anything that accepts web documents should be able to accept those documents as well. We hope that by sharing the technology from the web, from publications, we can also share the skills that the people have developed in the different areas. Web designers know how to design web pages. Typographers know how to design books. If we get them together with the same technology, then maybe we can get very readable web documents and very beautiful books, or the inverse, or both. Like web documents which have links to other web documents or to online services, those books, those journals, etc. should also have those same services associated to them. Of course, again, only when you're actually online at the moment when you're trying to use them. Think of things like, you have a book, it was up to date at the moment you bought it, but next year maybe some things change. You want to have the update, you want to know the errata. On a web page, that's easy. The web page does is updated and you get them automatically. If you have an offline book, how do you get those updates? Well, with these connected documents, you should be able to get those too. You can also have other associated services like a discussion forum. All the people who read the same book can together discuss what they thought about it. And it's not just the end user's experience that we hope to share and make better, but also the whole publication process. The process that is behind making a book, making a journal, making a newspaper. It's getting more and more digital already, and we think we can make it even more integrated with the technology we have from the web. So imagine you have a document, you're writing a book, you're an author, you're writing the content gets packaged somehow, somebody designs the cover for it, somebody makes an index, a table of contents, there's images added to it, somebody decides whether it's going to be printed with a hardcover or in a paperback, and all that information together is collected in that same electronic publication. That means that once it's all there, you can send it to a printer, maybe completely automatic printing machine, and at the other end you get a book out of it. The whole process is encoded in the book. Not just the content, but also the process. Maybe it's a long time ago, but yesterday morning, the very first talk, my colleague Dave Reiker talked about the Internet of Things and how it can be used in industry. This could be one of the examples. The book knows how it wants to be published, and it can instruct the machines that print the book, that bind it, that cut it, and it even may know where it is going to be sold, whether it's going to be lent for a library. All those information can also be encoded in the publication itself. Of course, we also want those things to be available for a long time. In a library, you find books from 100 years ago. We want these digital books also to be available for a very long time. That means we need standards that need to be stable, well supported, well documented, and hopefully our HTML-based documents will last long enough that in 2 or 3 generations from now, people are still able to read them. Another aspect of those documents, the combination of efforts, is we hope to get even better accessibility. We're already doing a lot. In W3C we have the WAY, we call it, the Web Accessibility Initiative. They've acquired a lot of expertise over the years already, how to make the web better, easier to use for all kinds of people with whatever handicap, older people, people with visual deficiencies, anything. The IDPF also has an effort in that respect. They have been working with a consortium called DAISY, who are behind those talking books. So that's why the EPUB standard includes the capability of making talking books. If we combine our efforts, my hope is that we will get even better. We will get talking books that also work on the web. So web pages that can be better accessible. And the combination of skills, the combination of knowledge that we have should make for an even better web. So this is not yet the case. These publications I'm talking about, they are planned. As I said, we are working on the preparations. We started this combination of IDPF and W3C in May, and if all goes well, we'll start a working group sometime early next year. January, February, maybe, we'll see. So this is future, but I think it is a realistic future. So if you're going to do that, make these very nice publications, electronic books that are connected to the web, that are easy to read, that have all these nice features that you know from web pages. That means that CSS has to acquire things that it doesn't have today. There are things in books that we cannot do with CSS. So we're going to add those. But you may ask, wasn't CSS supposed to be simple? That was the original claim. Everybody can use CSS. It's simple. If you can write HTML, you can also write CSS. Yes, that's true. CSS was supposed to be that way. We think it can still be simple, but we still need some extensions. Let's see how CSS was designed originally. CSS was designed to be simple. It was designed to be high level. Anybody can understand that you want a line aligned on the left or on the right. Exactly how that it works is something that typographers can tell you, but not everybody has to know that. So CSS gives you high-level hints that are at a level that anybody can understand, but we don't give you the control, the detail that topographers need to make a good-looking book. We left that to the implementations. We said, you want left aligned, you want right aligned, you want justified text, and the implementation is going to give you something. It can do a good job, a less good job, but we don't give you control over that in CSS. There are actually very many ways to justify lines. If you've studied typography a bit, then you may have seen that you can, of course, stretch the spaces between the words. That is just one way, the most common way. You can also shrink the spaces. It's already a little bit more complicated. You can stretch the space between the letters. That's another way. You can hyphenate the words, break the words at the end of the line. And all that you can do for every individual line, but you can also take a whole paragraph and try to shift words from one line to the next so that the overall look of the paragraph is better. To do a real good job of justification is actually quite a bit of work, especially if you have very narrow columns or very long words. Some languages have very long words and make justification very hard. And then there are languages where there aren't spaces, where the words are not separated. How do you justify there? So we are investigating that. We are writing about that, but so far CSS hasn't given a lot of control over it. Another example, fonts. You can select fonts in CSS. You can even nowadays deliver the fonts with the document. We have downloadable fonts. But for a long time, all you could do was select the font by name. You cannot select features within the font. If you've looked at TrueType, for example, or OpenType, one of the formats, the most common formats for fonts, it allows variants inside the font. There are some letters where it's the default letter, but there are also variants that you can use. For example, at the end of the line or the beginning of the line, you want a slightly different shape for a letter. So far, at least at the start of CSS, we didn't provide access to those variants. There are other features in the font. You can select different ways of aligning letters, for example. We didn't give access to that via CSS. But that is changing. That has already started changing. We have a module called the Fonts module, which gives access to a lot of different aspects of OpenType. So if you know about typography, about how fonts work, you can actually do a lot more now already with CSS than you could do when it was first designed. So we're already going to enhance CSS. So, accepting that we are going to enhance CSS, and that CSS is not just this very simple language that gives high-level hints to the implementation. Why didn't we do that long ago? CSS is going to celebrate its 20th birthday in December, 16th of December. So there's a birthday cake already. Why only after 20 years do we add those features? Well, I have a few ideas for why that is, and I'm going to go over all of these. So first one is, CSS wasn't originally going to be the final solution for everything. It was designed to be simple to use, I already said that. It was designed to be for simple documents, because I didn't expect, many other people also didn't expect, that CSS was to be the only style language. We also didn't expect it was to be the final style language. We expected it to be used for a while, and then we might have a replacement, or maybe even two replacements, a simple one and a more advanced one. And Indeed, we started not long after CSS. In 1998, we started creating XSL, which is a more complex language to use, but is also more powerful. Already, very soon after it started, it included features like vertical text, like in Japanese, where the lines go from top to bottom. It had features for pages, laying out pages, much more than CSS even has today. And it had more properties than CSS. It included the CSS properties, but also many more. And so XSL was a success. It still is, actually. It's still used a lot. If you're on the web, you don't see it a lot. If you're in publishing, you probably have seen it. It's actually quite good at making books, but it's not so used on the web, which means we have trouble finding the resources to continue its development. We are, after all, a web consortium. So most of the people that come to us, most of the companies that work with us are looking first at what is used on the web, online. So 3 years ago, we decided to stop the development of XSLFO, which is the part of XSL that describes the layout. There were just not enough members to form a working group. And with just 3 or 4 people, we cannot develop a standard. We also saw that many people were switching to CSS, even for books. XSL existed, but people were seeing that CSS was developing, XSL was not, and CSS was easier to use. So people were asking us to develop CSS instead of XSL. For example, just a few weeks ago, I watched somebody from Hachette Livres. It's one of the biggest publishers in the world. And he gave a talk about how they are using CSS. And he told us that already they've sold more than 50 million books that were all made with CSS, HTML and CSS. They started doing that 6 years ago, in 2010. They have already sold a number of bestsellers, even made with this technology. It's mostly novels, though. It's mostly books with rather simple layout. They have done experiments with more complex books, like travel guides, where you have images in different places, more complex pages, not just text, but text overlapping images and other things. You can get quite far with that, but it's actually a lot of work to do that with the current state of CSS. And some things are just not possible. Hachette Livres is actually active here in Brazil as well, so who knows, maybe you already have books that were made with CSS and you didn't know it. If you do, I indeed hope you don't know it, because it should be invisible. It should be just like any other book. And another reason why we are taking so much time to add advanced features to CSS, actually these advanced features are quite hard. They are things that people in the publishing world know. People that work on the web usually don't know these things. Now, there's long traditions, but transferring those skills and that knowledge to a different group of people takes time. The working group, the CSS working group, has mostly people who work for web browsers, make web pages, they design apps maybe, but they don't design many books, they don't create journals. So we need to learn skills. We need to invite people to come to the working group and teach us and tell us what's needed. And just to give you an idea of unexpected problems we face sometimes. This is going back 20 years ago. When I came to the web, I came from a background in university where we were designing books. I knew SGML, the standard that HTML was originally built on. So for me, coming from that environment, a document was a tree structure. That was logical. What else could it be? The people implementing web browsers at the time didn't see it like that. For them, HTML was a set of commands. The li command meant put a bullet there. The block quote command meant indent from now on until the end of the block quote. It wasn't a tree at all. I didn't know that. So when I thought inheritance is logical, CSS properties inherit, and that is easy, it wasn't easy at all. And many of the bugs that were in early browsers were easily explained once you know that the early browsers weren't tree structured. But for me that was a mystery at first. Nowadays, of course, all browsers have a DOM, a document object model, so the tree structure is well represented and we can build on that. But we find similar problems, things that in certain industries people take for granted, and in others they're completely unknown. So learning is a long process, it takes time, but it's necessary. Another reason why adding features for good typography takes time is that CSS is also used for other things, in particular for graphical user interfaces. Originally, HTML, CSS were meant for documents, articles, chapters in a book, things like that. Text mostly, with some images maybe, single column of text, titles, some lists and bullets, etc., but nothing very complicated. Certainly not for creating a user interface with a menu bar and buttons and toolbars, etc. That wasn't what it was meant for. I expected that there would be a separate language for that at some point. Not HTML, but something dedicated for user interfaces. Indeed, in W3C we tried several times to create a standard language for graphical user interfaces. But we failed. People just couldn't agree on one. And also people liked HTML and CSS so much that they tried to do everything with that, including user interfaces. And that meant that CSS had to change. CSS, HTML also, by the way, had to acquire properties, features that were specifically designed for graphical user interfaces. That's why we have now, for example, Flexbox, and Grid is one of the latest modules in CSS. We also have transformations. We're working on graphical capabilities like masking and blending, animations, of course. Those features are great for user interfaces, but they had to be added, and they are not so easy to add. That's taken a long time. It's still not all done, so that's taking a lot of resources away from other things we could add to CSS. And for browsers, certainly at the moment, web apps, applications have priority over nice printing, so those take up most of the time of the CSS working group. Yet another reason, we want to have web pages appearing on our screen very fast. If you click on a link, you want to see the page as fast as possible. There are some claims that it should really arrive within 3 seconds, otherwise it's not experienced as interactive. And if you've probably noticed, the web is actually getting slower and slower. If you've been on the web for a while, like I have, it was actually better at the start. Networks weren't as fast, computers were not fast, but web pages appeared really within 3 seconds. Why is that? Well, most of it is due to the pages getting bigger and bigger and bigger, including more resources, more images, more JavaScript, all those big libraries, the frameworks. Sometimes they're not even needed, but they're included anyway. That makes that web pages become slow. So what can we do about that? Well, apart from telling people not to do that, the web browsers try to make themselves faster. So in CSS that means we try to take care that all the properties can be implemented in a way that make things appear on the screen very fast. So whenever we add a new feature, the first question is, will this slow down the browser? And if the answer is yes, it will, then that feature is not going to be added, or at least not in the short term. So things that we need for good typography, like optimizing a table so it really balances the content over the different cells, which you cannot do in a single pass over the text. You have to do trial and error and maybe pass over the same document a few times until you find the right layout. Computers can do that, but it slows them down. So those features we are adding, but with some delay. Speed is important, but speed also, you have to know what you're talking about. Slow is a relative term. It's relative to what you want to do with the page. When I say automatic layout, automatic balancing of tables, good hyphenation, line breaking, all those things can easily be done by a modern computer in real time. You're editing a page and it gets formatted in real time while you're editing. That's no problem. Compared to when we started CSS 20 years ago, computers are so fast now, they're really hundreds of times faster. It's not a problem. But it is still a problem if you want to do an animation at the same time. Imagine doing a re-layout of a table 60 times a second. Then it really starts playing. So the question is, how do we add those features we need for good printing, for good readability, and also keep our fast animations? Well, there are some things we came up with already. One property is called the will change property in CSS. That's a property by which you can indicate to the implementation that which other properties are going to need speed. So if you're going to use the color property in an animation, you can say the color property needs this extra effort. Please optimize that because the color is going to change. And all the other properties that you don't mention there, they will not be optimized. They can take a little bit longer because they are not going to be used in animations. It's one solution. It's not perfect, but we made a specification for that, and it's going to be implemented. It's probably already implemented in some browsers. So you can try it out. It's not a complete solution, so we're also looking for other things. In the context of selectors, for example, if you want to do a little bit of complex layout, you will also need complex selectors. And some selectors are more costly than others. They take more time to evaluate. So we're also thinking of maybe dividing the selectors into those that can be done quickly and those that need a little bit more time. So profiles for implementations that need speed. In a web app, you want the interface to react quickly, so it won't implement all the selectors. And maybe in an implementation that produces PDF output, it can take more time and it can also do more complex things and accept more complex selectors. We haven't decided if this is a good idea yet. We haven't worked out the complete details of that yet. It's under discussion. We have some documents describing it, but it's certainly not a specification yet. And the third solution we're thinking about is to use Houdini, and I'll come back to Houdini later. A little aside, whenever you're switching technologies, when you're replacing an old technology by a new one, you lose some things. So going back a few centuries to when printing was invented, Gutenberg, he did his best to make very nice books, and he actually did a very good job. But at the same time, his technology lost certain things that people writing by hand could apply. Some things were lost, but of course you got other things back instead. You got faster turnaround. Books were produced cheaper, so the loss was made up by other advantages. And eventually, even the losses disappeared as technology improved. The books were as readable, as rich in content as the manuscript before that. And I think we're in the same situation now when we are shifting digital publishing from traditional methods, typewriters, handwritten copy that's sent to the publisher, that's marked up with a red pen, transformed in various formats. When you're going to replace that with a standard format, we are no doubt going to lose some of the things that people were able to do with the current technology and won't be able to do with the new technology. One of those things, of course, is that CSS is not there yet. Not all the things you can do in a book nowadays, you can do with CSS. As I said, novels are okay, but more difficult books don't work so well, very well. But you get something back. I think you get enough back to make this worthwhile. A standard format can be used anywhere. A well-known format also, HTML, CSS. Everybody knows it by now. So that means you can find people to program things for you, to use it, to create the tools you need to use those formats. Software will be cheaper because there will be more of it. And integration with the web is also something very useful. Books that integrate well with the web means people will probably want to buy those books more than they already buy normal books. And I expect CSS will get better, HTML will get better. All our technologies will eventually deliver the same quality that people have been used to from traditional books and magazines, etc. So, just a little illustration of the things we want to add to books, to the technology we are developing. An example from the book that I made together with Håkon, my co-inventor. The third edition of the book, which was published in 2005, so more than 10 years ago, was actually one of the first books that was completely made with HTML and CSS. We didn't convert it to Word or to FrameMaker or anything. We did everything in HTML, editing, the formatting with CSS, and then it had to be converted to PDF to print it, because there are no printers. Well, there are nowadays printers that accept HTML, CSS, but not the high-end printers. They need PDF. But even so, our process, doing everything in HTML, meant that the publisher afterwards was able to tell us that we gained about 3 weeks in the overall process from our final document to the printer, they correcting it, sending us feedback, we updating the document, they correcting it again. All that time was quicker because we did everything electronically. We produced the PDF for them using the tools we had, and that meant everything went quicker. So there was an advantage already at that point. We did have to do some hacks though to make it work. CSS doesn't have everything, didn't have everything we needed, and also there were no tools that did everything we needed. The program we used in the end was Prince But we had to ask the maker of prints to add some special features for us. So we designed some experimental CSS properties, and the programmer was able to add those. Later they ended up in the commercial version of prints, but we were the first to use those. That includes things like cross-references, being able to say, see page 71, because how do we know that it is page 71? It hasn't been printed yet, so we don't know the page number. We need some sort of a placeholder for that gets filled in at the moment the document is actually formatted. Columns also didn't exist at the time. They are standard now, but not in 2005. Hyphenation, we didn't have properties for those, and certainly no implementations. In fact, hyphenation turned out to be too hard to implement in the short period we had for producing the book. But it was possible to implement the soft hyphens. So we ended up inserting soft hyphens in every word using a little wrapper that we wrote in Perl. And that's how the book was produced. If you want to know more about producing PDF from HTML CSS, there is somebody, Andreas Jung, who has a website specifically about that. He talks about prints and Antenna House and a PDF Reactor and other products that can do that. So, what do we need in CSS? I'm just going to give you a few examples that I found. Every once in a while I like to look in books and magazines and ask myself, can I do that with CSS? Actually, in the CSS working group, we have a sort of a tradition when at the end of a day of meetings we go and have dinner. We look at the menu and see if we can reproduce the menu in HTML and CSS. Nowadays, most of the time, it works. We succeed. Menus are not that difficult. But I remember a famous example made by Tantek Selik, who is in the working group, in a Chinese restaurant trying to make a Chinese menu. And he eventually managed to do that by using tables with explicitly overlapping cells. Otherwise, we couldn't reproduce the menu. Nowadays, it's not a problem anymore. But so, a few examples. This is very small, but I took a photo of a mathematics textbook. And actually, I had to look through several books, quite a few books, to find an example. This example, in the first line, the running header above the text, there was a formula, a mathematical formula in the running header. It's something that's very rare, actually. Even in mathematics books, it doesn't happen very often. But it can happen. And we cannot do that with CSS at the moment. And why is that? We have in CSS a possibility to make running headers. So we have the page body, the central part, and along the edges we can put text. We have a number of regions, and each region can get a bit of text. But it's only plain text. We can give it a font and a color, but it cannot be structured. It doesn't allow markup in there. And markup is what we need to get the mathematics in there. So if we would do that mathematics book with CSS, the formula would be flattened into an unreadable sequence of tokens, of letters that don't resemble a formula anymore. So if you want a little bit more complex running headers, we need structured running headers that allow multiple fonts, more layout for parts of the running header. And one idea to do that is, well, why not take an element with its structure in HTML and move that whole element to the running header. We actually have implementations of that in print. For example, we have a CSS specification, a working draft. It's not a standard yet, but that describes how this could work. You select an element in a document with a normal CSS selector, and then you put a property on it that says this element is going to be used for the running header. And then you style it as normal, and it is displayed in the running header rather than in the body of the document. So that's one way. It's actually not such a bad way, because if the running header is complex, then in practice, very often, it is not an exact copy of something that appears in the document. It is something specifically designed to be in a running header anyway. So that's not such a strange idea. Another idea that's a little bit more powerful, though, is to say we can take an element in a document and use it in two ways. We use it both in the body of the document. So a header of a chapter, for example, it appears above the chapter in a normal text, but it also appears in the running header. So in that case, we need to make a copy of the element. We need to have two copies that are styled independently. If we are able to do that, indeed, the first solution with a dedicated element is just a special case of this, because one of the copies is just not displayed. But this second idea is more difficult. We don't have any implementations of that yet. Just imagine how you would, for example, handle events on such an element with two copies. Where does the event go? Imagine what the structure of the DOM would be like if you have to move through a DOM and some element appears twice. So we haven't solved that yet. Running headers, the word says running header, so it's usually above the text of a page, but not always, especially in journals. There's text that appears not at the top, but it's still conceptually a running header. For example, there may be two separate stories on the same page. Imagine a magazine that has two columns with two separate stories, and both of the columns have their own running header. We cannot do that with the simple model that I showed you, a single box with headers around it. So we need some way to create other page models. We don't have that yet. Similar example, a call-out. You see a big quote mark in the middle with some text. That is a call-out. That is something that you find often in magazines to draw attention to something. It's not a header. It's not a section header. It's also not a running header at the top of the page, but it's similar to a running header nevertheless, because it somehow gets taken out of the normal text, put in a special dedicated area that's reserved for that. It doesn't get repeated like a running header. It only appears once, but there's still enough overlap that maybe this is something for a single property that should be able to do both callouts and running headers. Another example, this is very small. Everything is online. If you want to see this in more detail, you can go to the slides online and enlarge the image. But here we have 3 columns. The middle column has an image, a photo in this case. There's 2 interesting things about it. It's in the middle. So is it floating? Well, it's floating maybe, but it's floating to a specific place. It has to be in the middle. Does not float just where it happens to be, but has to go to the middle. And also, it's slightly above the other columns. That's probably hard to see because those images are small, but it's not completely aligned, and I'm sure that's not an accident, that is on purpose. Another photo from a magazine, 4 columns, 4 different stories. They have images above them. The images are aligned at the bottom. Also, at the bottom of each column, there is the last paragraph, which is shown in blue, and it's aligned at the bottom. So some stories are shorter than others, but the last paragraph is always at the bottom of the column. So we want to do that too. This is a page where you see columns again, but some things span more than one column. We have column properties, we have also a column span property, but so far the column span property can only do span over the whole page, not over two columns. This is from before printing. This is actually a manuscript. I showed it because it has a nice layout. It also has a whole history to it. It's not created in a single pass. It's started by somebody creating the middle part, and then many years later somebody else adding the text around it. So reproducing this will need the ability to design regions on the page and fill each of the regions with its own text. And in this case, the regions are not even rectangles, they are U-shaped things here. This is for when you look it up on the web. You can follow some of the links to the specifications and requirements we have. We have many for many different languages also. So let me quickly tell you a little bit about Houdini. I know many people are interested in that. One of the ways we are trying to extend CSS is by letting you extend it yourself. We will continue to add properties to CSS when they are necessary, when they are common enough that everybody needs them. But there are also many things that are specific to specific applications, specific context, and in that case, we won't add them to CSS itself, but instead we will provide an API, and then you can design your own properties and add those via a bit of JavaScript. Those APIs are available at all levels of the implementation. You can extend the parser, you can extend the rendering engine, you can extend the event handler, you can extend many different parts, and for example, create a browser with your own extensions that way. It's not going to be simple. This is really for advanced programmers. We don't expect the average CSS user to create their own Houdini extensions, but it's going to be powerful. Mathematics might be one example where this is going to help. Mathematics is, for browsers, especially a niche market. Not that many people compared to the whole population needs mathematics, so maybe we can implement mathematics, good typography of mathematics, this way. Why do we call them Houdini APIs? Any idea? Houdini was a magician, and he's known for two things actually. He's known for escaping from boxes, locked into a box and able to escape. CSS has a box model, so we want you to escape the box model. That's one. Houdini was also known for demystifying. People claimed magical things, paranormal things, and he was able to show how it actually worked, and we want to show how CSS actually works. So that's the end. We want you to participate, of course. We need help, as I said. We need skills. We need people that know how to do these things. So please help. You can help in many different ways. You find some links there. And that's it. That's the link. If you want to look up the slides, the top line there shows the URL. So feel free to read them and send me comments. My email address is there too. That's the end of my presentation. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah. Okay. Gente,
We have time for a few questions. Not a lot of time, because we expected to wrap up by 6:30, but we still have time for a few questions. I think until 10 p.m. it'd just be fine, right? To talk about CSS. because lights will be turned off at 10. So if you have any questions, please come forward and speak into the mic. As he said, you should move out of the box, out of the book box, and start thinking a little bit different. Good afternoon. My name is Tiago. First, congratulations and thank you for having invented CSS. Congratulations for working so long at W3C and for the standards you develop. You mentioned that by the joint effort of W3C and the other Institute for Books Standards, you mentioned DAISY. So I'm curious about ORAL, the CSS Speak module that was already specified. It was a candidate for recommendation. It's been waiting for the recommendation since 2012. Why do you think that that has not evolved? Why hasn't it become popular? Maybe, in my understanding, this could be an amazing technology for audiobooks or for us to listen to documents.
Yes, indeed, I'd like the speech module to move faster. We need to find enough implementations. We need to have enough tests also to prove that implementations exist. All that needs people to write the test, people to do the test implementations. It is used, it exists. There is translation, for example, to another standard of W3C, this SSML, the Speech Synthesis Markup Language. You can translate from CSS to that and implement it that way. So that exists, but yes, I would like it to go faster, and that probably needs more people to lobby for it, more people to help us test it. So if you can express your opinion in a wider context, then that will certainly help us progress.
Thank you. Next. I have already worked at a publishing house. We know that in the publishing business, the standard, printing standard is PDF. Where do we stand in terms of interoperability between EPUB and new technologies that are moving forward? How interoperable are they with PDF? Will we move towards one single standard so that we can write a document in that standard and that can be put, used to be printed also on the web?
The HTML-based books will not compete with PDF. The idea is that they will exist in parallel. There's two kinds of e-books. The EPUB standard talks about fixed layout and reflowable layout. The fixed layout, which you use, for example, for comics, for strips, they can be done with PDF. If you want reflow, so if you have an e-reader, you want to be able to increase the font size, not by zooming, but by actually reflowing the text, then PDF doesn't work for that. Then you need HTML-based books. So we think they will both exist. We expect them to both exist. PDF also has a role in printing, of course, so the final step before printing will very likely still be PDF. But the production process will happen in HTML or in XML and CSS.
Próximo.
Next. Good evening. My name is Andre. For the past 12 years, I've been working for a Hindu publishing house, but that publishes books in English too. We've been through XLS, EPUB, and now watching your talk, this possibility of having one single format where we could store our books, both for printing purposes as well as online consumption, considering that I have already programmed 3 EPUB readers and I'm done with it and I can't stand it anymore. So I would like to know, where are we headed? What can we do to help this working group? Because if I could only have one single format for everything, it would be bliss.
Okay. Well, if you know Indic languages, then you can help. We have one of the links on my slides that I passed over quite quickly was a link to the Indic requirements document that describes for various Indic scripts, there's not one, but there are several, how layout is traditionally done there. So if you can give feedback on that, review that and help us make that a good, complete standard for Indic layout. That will certainly help. The CSS working group looks at those documents. It's an important input to how CSS is designed. So that's certainly something that will help us. If you know about implementations also, then maybe you even have ideas for how this would translate into CSS properties. And you can maybe give us some ideas. Features for existing properties or new properties. You can either send email or go to the GitHub repository and comment on anything you see there. So yes, please give feedback.
André, se você quiser mais orientação.
If you want to learn more about how to join the working groups, you can talk to us. The W3C office in Brazil can help you and tell you how you can join those working groups. Any fun? No girls asking questions, just men? All male questions? How come? Oh, there you go. So first, congratulations on your talk. My name is Belchior. I'm a web developer. A while ago, started working with digital books just because I wanted to do something different. And I realized that the digital book standards share common inheritance with HTML, but I found it very difficult to do something that is very important: transferring content from one HTML page to a digital book, and the content of a digital book to HTML, considering they would speak the same language. But in practice, it's not that easy. I share the sadness of my friend here because I find this difficult. W3C and IDPF, do you plan to make those two standards to be interoperable so that it's not so difficult to move between those two platforms?
Change the existing EPUB standards. Those are there and they will remain as they are. But the next version of EPUB, whether it's called EPUB or something else, is going to be a common standard that should be available in web browsers, on e-readers, and both without any changes between the two. So a single standard for both of them. And based on HTML and CSS again, but maybe very probably actually with different ways to do the other things around the HTML. So the XML data that is currently describing the metadata will probably be done differently. The spine, the table of contents, those things, the manifest will probably be different in such a way that we can use them both on the web from JavaScript or any of the existing technologies, and also it is exactly the same document in an e-reader. That is the goal, and we hope to start working on that early next year. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Última pergunta.
Last question. Good afternoon. I would also like to congratulate you for having created the language that designers love the most, maybe the only one that is liked by designers. I was curious about the process of conceptualizing and creating the language. Were there designers in your creation team, or what kind of skills did the team members had? I suppose that now you have a much broader team, but at first, what kind of knowledge did you have in the team of those that have developed it?
Yeah, as you already said, it is a long process with many people involved over time. So when you go really back to the first idea that Håkon and I had from the university where I worked a background in documents already. I was working with people who were, for example, in the ISO committee that standardized HTML. So I knew about document formats and about the style languages that existed already at that time for HTML. Including a standard called DISL, which is an important example for our later XSL. So I knew a little bit about that. I was not a designer, I was interested in typography, but I knew how the technology worked. At the time Håkon and I worked on CSS, we weren't the only people working on style sheet languages. We were working on a mailing list, the WW mailing list at the time. And there were other proposals from other people also proposing style sheet languages. Ours turned out to be the most popular, but we all influenced each other. So many people from different backgrounds, from the document world, from implementers, they all contributed already at that time. I don't think at the time we had many graphic designers. We had people who knew about books, but not so much graphic designers. Those came later. Those were at the time mostly still working with 1-pixel GIFs and animated GIFs, the things we didn't want at the time. But they soon joined us. So the very first period, I think it was mostly people working in documents. And as soon as it became clear that CSS was going to be a standard and we had a working group for it, people started contributing from everywhere, including graphic designers. The CSS logo that you know, the squares, that was designed by a graphic designer who was in the working group at that time. That's already in 95, I think, 96 maybe. So we already had designers in the working group at the very, very early stages.
Se você tiver mais 20 horas, ele conta o
If you still have more than 20 hours, he can tell you about the beginning, the first years, and then we can go on and on. Well, Bert, thank you very, very much for your availability, for coming, for being here with us and sharing your ideas. I've seen in the Instagram that you got to be the most popular participant in our Web.br conference. So many people had selfies with you, so you just got famous and popular in our Instagrams here. Thank you very much for your contribution, for having come to Brazil, and I wish you success in the work with Houdini. Thank you very much.
Bom, gente, acabou.
Well, now it's done. Before you leave, a big round of applause to all the technical staff who has supported. Translators, thank you. We thank you. Video, audio, everyone. They have been working, all of us have been working very hard. And thanks to all of us, it's been really successful. I would like to thank our NIC.br organizers. They really deserve a big round of applause as well. And I would like to thank W3C Brasil team and Center Web. Please, all of you stand up. We have a large team of 6 people. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you so much. And for all of you participants, please do not fail to complete your evaluation about what you've heard here. Give us your suggestions so that WebBR 2017 can be even better. Thank you and enjoy the weekend.